If you are still going to church on Sundays, then this video is for you. Hello and welcome to The Christian Life. Chances are that you've never even thought about this question, but I struggled with it for years. What day does the Bible tell us to go to church? What do you mean, you might ask? Obviously Sunday, right? Well, are you really sure about that though? As you may know, in the Old Testament, God says that we should go to church on Saturday. It's called the Sabbath. The Sabbath is even part of the Ten Commandments. And even Jesus went to church as a tradition on Saturday. But today, almost all churches have church on Sunday. I have been part of both Saturday as well as Sunday keeping churches. And only just a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to look into it more to see, does it even matter? And if so, then I wanted to go to church on the day that God had said. My wife and I found that people are using mainly two arguments for why we should go to church on Sunday. So let's have a look at these reasons and the Bible verses that they use to support that idea and see for ourselves, does the Bible really say that we should go to church on Sunday? The first reason people use is because Jesus resurrected on a Sunday. And by going to church on a Sunday, you are celebrating his resurrection. But is this something that Jesus tells us to do? Jesus actually never tells us that we should move the day of worship from Saturday to Sunday because he resurrected on that day. There is no verse about that. What he did say we should do to remember and celebrate what he has done is to celebrate communion and also through baptism. When we go under the water, we are buried with him. And when we are being raised up out of the water, we are being raised to a new life in him. So through communion and baptism, we remember and we celebrate what Jesus has done for us. That is what the Bible tells us to do, not to go to church on that day. In relation to Jesus' resurrection on the Sunday, there is one verse that I want to look at together. We find it in Revelation 1 verse 10. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet. The Lord's day. What day is that? Now, people say that it's Sunday because Jesus resurrected on that day. Did you know that the Sunday in the Bible is never called the Lord's Day or God's Day or anything like it? But there is one day that God himself says is his day. Even Jesus says he is Lord over it. And that is always the Saturday Sabbath. With that in mind, does it make sense that now all of a sudden we say the Lord's Day is the Sunday? It's only because of tradition that we would even think like that, because nothing in the Bible would indicate that the Lord's Day is talking here about the Sunday. The Lord's Day is always the Saturday Sabbath. Of course, the resurrection of Jesus is a special moment that we should remember and celebrate. But let's do that through the way that Jesus said we should. Through baptism and through communion. And not all of a sudden that we come up with our own idea to do that is actually going against what God had said. The second reason is that people say the first church was already keeping Sunday. So let's have a look at the three verses that are commonly used to support this idea and see for ourselves what they say. John 20 verse 19. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut where the disciples were assembled. Okay, let's pause right here, because here the disciples are coming together on a Sunday. But now we need to ask the question, why? What were they doing? Were they having a church service, or were they coming together for a completely different reason? Let's continue the verse. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled, for fear of the Jews, came Jesus and stood in the midst and saith unto them, Peace be unto you. So were the disciples here celebrating Jesus' resurrection in a church service? No, the doors were shut, they were afraid. Why were they afraid? Because earlier that day, Jesus had resurrected. They had heard about this, but they had not seen Jesus for themselves, so they didn't know if it was true. What they did know is that the Jewish and Roman authorities really would not appreciate news like that to spread, that a man that they should have killed is now walking around alive and well. Did you know that the reason why there were so many soldiers surrounding Jesus' tomb, and the Bible tells us, was because the Jews had gone to the Roman authorities because they were afraid that the disciples of Jesus would come and take Jesus' body and start spreading the news that Jesus had resurrected. So the Jewish and Roman authorities wanted to prevent this very message that now was spreading. So you can imagine that the disciples were afraid that the Jewish and Roman authorities would come after them. So does this verse support the idea that we should have church on Sunday? Well, you decide for yourself. 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God has prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. And here people say, you see, Paul is instructing them to have a weekly offering at the church service. Okay, let's analyze this. Does the verse say anything about church service? It doesn't, right? Does Paul tell them to bring the money to a church building? It doesn't either. Where does Paul tell them to keep the money? By him, which means in their own house. And Paul wants to avoid that as soon as he gets there, that every family still needs to do their own personal administration and calculations and decision making of how much they are willing to give. That is why he says to lay it aside in your own house every week, so that as soon as Paul gets there, you can, without problem, take the money you had been gathering and give it to him. Acts 20, verse 7. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them. Okay, let's again pause, because here Paul and the other believers are coming together on a Sunday, they're having communion, and Paul is even preaching to them. That must show that they were having church on Sunday, right? What we need to figure out here is, was it a habit for them to come together on Sundays, or was this one occasion? Let's continue reading this verse. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. If you think about this, Paul had been there for 7 days. Do you think they were meeting together more often? Yeah, probably, right? So the meeting together in itself does not per se show any significance. Now, why then is this particular coming together mentioned, the one on the Sunday, and not any of those gatherings that we can expect them to have had during the week? Well, we just read it in this verse, because Paul would leave the next day. This same verse tells us he would be preaching until midnight, but when we read verse 11, it says he talked a long while, even until the break of day, which would be about 5 or 6 in the morning. So here we can already see this is a special occasion, because I don't think that they were having church services that would last from the evening until 5 or 6 in the morning. And all throughout the book of Acts, Luke is carefully writing down when these special events happened. Nothing in this verse or the context is giving any evidence that this was a weekly habit that they were having. Rather, that this was one special occasion because Paul would leave the very next day. And they wanted to seize every opportunity to learn from him and to discuss with him before he would go. It might surprise you, but nowhere in the entire Bible will you find a verse that tells you to go to church on Sunday instead of on Saturday. Yet today, almost all churches are having church on Sunday. If not for the Bible, where then does this idea come from? You can actually already hear it in the name, Sunday. In the 4th century, the standard Roman religion was the worship of the sun gods. And when Constantine, the emperor at that time, one time he had a vision of a flaming cross in the sky, with the Latin words under it translated as, "In this sign, conquer." So Constantine decided to become a Christian. The problem was that he also still was a worshipper of the sun gods. So he tried to find ways in which he could merge both paganism and other rituals and habits and symbols and all of these things together with Christianity. And one of the things that he did in 321 AD is that he made a law making the Sunday the day of worship. Later, at the Council of Laodicea in 364 AD, the Catholic Church decided to forbid the worship on the Saturday Sabbath. And then all throughout the Dark Ages, They persecuted and even put to death many Christians who were still holding on to the Saturday Sabbath. Now listen to these significant quotes from Catholic sources about this change from Saturday to Sunday. The Bible says that thou keep holy the Sabbath day. The Catholic Church says no. By my divine power, I abolish the Sabbath day and command you to keep holy the first day of the week. And lo, the entire civilized world bows down in reverent obedience to the command of the Holy Catholic Church. Sunday is our mark of authority. The Church is above the Bible, and this transference of Sabbath observance is proof of that fact. The holy day, the Sabbath, was changed from Saturday to Sunday, not from any directions noted in the scriptures, but from the Church's sense of its own power. People who think that the scripture should be the sole authority should logically become Seventh-day Adventists and keep the Saturday holy. Friends, I know that this might be overwhelming to you. Maybe you've never even given it a thought that this might be an issue. But you know, it is important to God. Even so much so that the Sabbath is actually part of the 10 Commandments. By choosing to keep the Sunday, you are actually choosing, whether you have been aware of it or not, you are actually choosing the doctrines of man over the commandments of God. And you have a choice to make. Who do you want to follow? God or man? And I just want to encourage you that, having been in a similar position that you might be in right now, is that choosing God's way is always what is best for you. And no matter what challenges the changes can bring, it's always worth it. And let me end with the words of Jesus. John 14 verse 15. If you love me, keep my commandments. I want to thank you for having taken the time to watch this video. Please feel free to share it with your friends who go to church on Sundays. Chances are that they don't know the things that we have just talked about, and this video might help them to discover more about what the Bible really says, to step into a deeper relationship with God and love Him more. You can also find us on social media and on our website, thechristianlife.com, and next week we'll have a new video for you.